made, but speculated that it came into his phone somewhere between 3:55 and 4:05 a.m., likely closer to the latter. According to Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked the case from its inception, the last activity in Trevor's phone log came at 4:06 a.m. on the morning of Friday, December 8th. From this point forward, he had no known contact with anyone. However, that is not the last place that he was seen alive. Back in 2000, there were far fewer CCTV cameras than there are today. So sadly, only 2 known cameras captured Trevor walking from the nightclub to his office, and then on from there, wherever he ended up. If you recall from the episode introduction, one of those surveillance cameras spotted him outside of the office building. The other spotted him walking outside of a local bank, located on the corner of Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road, a space now occupied by a pizza joint. The time of the second sighting was 4:14 a.m., approximately 8 minutes after Trevor's last recorded phone activity. Approximately half an hour before Trevor arrived at his office building, close to 3 a.m., a man dressed in dark clothing showed up outside and seemed to lurk around for a bit. When Trevor arrived at 3:35, he had a brief conversation with the man before going inside to grab an umbrella, chat with his colleague Carl Pender, and have a cup of tea. 2 minutes after Trevor arrived at the office gates, 2 more men arrived, but were gone within moments. As I mentioned earlier, these 2 men were later identified as coworkers of Trevor's and were believed to have coincidentally been there. By the time Trevor left his office, at around 4 a.m., the man in the dark jacket or hoodie who had been lingering around was no longer waiting there. But in the CCTV footage recorded a bit later, at approximately 4:14 a.m., Trevor is seen walking past AIB Bank near the corner of the Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road, in the direction of his apartment. However, in the footage, approximately 30 seconds after Trevor passes, another figure steps into frame. A man dressed in dark clothing, possibly a hoodie. Authorities believe that this is the same man who briefly spoke to Trevor outside of his office gates, who remains unidentified to this day. Despite numerous appeals by the Irish Garda, this man has failed to come forward over the past 22 years. Authorities believe that he is the same man who had been spotted talking to Trevor outside of his office, and like I said, he remains unidentified to this day. This last little snippet of CCTV footage represents the last known sighting of Trevor Deely. Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from today's sponsors. On the morning of Friday, December 8th, 2000, Trevor Deely did not show up for work. Because he and his colleagues had been out rather late the night before, his absence wasn't seen as overly suspicious, even though this behavior was very unlike him. To make matters even more complicated, Trevor's flatmates were away that weekend, so at this point nobody was aware he was even missing. He had made some loose plans with both his friends and family for that weekend, but because nobody was able to get in touch with him, they both just assumed that he was with the other. On Monday, December 11th, Trevor was a no-show for work yet again. This is when his manager got concerned. Worried, Dara Tracy started asking other employees if they had heard from Trevor since the evening of the Christmas party, but nobody had seen or spoken to him since then. Tracy then alerted the bank's HR department, informing them, "We have a problem here. This guy is not to be found. We can't get hold of him, and we don't know where he is. What should we do?" After confirming that nobody had spoken to or seen Trevor in several days, the bank reported him as a missing person and alerted his family back in Nace. From here, his family began to branch out through Trevor's network of acquaintances via telephone, with Trevor's mom, Anne, asking her husband Michael to check out the apartment that Trevor shared with 2 others. She also called Trevor's friends, but discovered that none of them had seen him since the previous Thursday. Trevor's father Michael went to his son's apartment, but did not have a key. He tried ringing the doorbell repeatedly, but nobody responded. With no other option, and no clue pointing them to their youngest son's whereabouts, Trevor's parents had to report him missing that evening. Glenn Cullen and other friends of Trevor's accompanied them to the Garda station in Naas, where they handed over all of the information available to them to the authorities. Trevor's older brother, Mark Deely, had been informed of his brother's disappearance at approximately 10:30 on Monday morning. He was at work in Castlebar, in Western Ireland, more than 200 kilometers away, but decided to leave for Dublin right away. His wife, who was at home and pregnant with their first child, stayed behind at home. When Mark arrived in the Dublin area later that afternoon, both of his parents were at home. After arriving, he headed towards Trevor's apartment, hoping to ask around and see what he could find. He reportedly looked around Trevor's neighborhood, checking nearby alleyways and even garbage bins. He even asked some local security guards and business employees if they had seen Trevor. One of the guards in front of the nearby US Embassy told him that due to the expected visit of then US President Bill Clinton the next day, all of the garbage bins and dumpsters in the area had been emptied over the weekend. The local government had even taken the step of checking and sealing the manhole covers, meaning that both avenues, the garbage and sewers, would be a dead end for Mark's search. Meanwhile, Trevor's older sister Michelle was in London when her mother gave her the bad news. She had not seen Trevor since Easter, but had been in recent contact with him through email. The two had emailed just earlier that week, and she had asked him his shirt size. That weekend, unbeknownst that her brother was missing, Michelle had bought Trevor a shirt, which she intended to give to him in just a couple of weeks for Christmas. Later, recalling the moment that she learned of her brother's disappearance, Michelle stated, "There was an instant realization that this was bad. I couldn't think straight. I knew it was bad. I knew it was awful. It's like a flash of light. It just blanks everything else out." Michelle came back home on the first flight she could find and headed straight to her parents' home, where she stayed for the foreseeable future. Pamela, Trevor's other sister, joined them shortly afterward. Soon, the entire Deely family, joined by Trevor's friends, started searching for him in earnest. Trevor Deely's family and friends began going door to door throughout the area near his apartment in Dublin, hitting up every pub, club, and restaurant they could find in the hopes of finding out where he had gone. They began putting up hundreds of posters with his name and photo, and even distributed countless amounts of leaflets with the same information. When they weren't doing that, they were likely hitting the streets and asking if someone, anyone, had seen or heard Trevor since he had gone missing on the morning of December 8th. That December, residents of Dublin and the surrounding area became accustomed to seeing Trevor's face all around the city. His family and friends did what they could all day every day to spread awareness of his disappearance, and some of the posters they hung up remained there for months to come, in certain cases, even years. Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked Trevor's case from the very beginning, stated, "The Deelys set the standard for what families do when someone got missing. They were very proactive. The town was postered before we got out of the door. I've never worked on a case where the family was so proactive." The CCTV footage from AIB Bank, which captured Trevor walking by at 4:14 on the morning of December 8th, was not discovered by police, but was actually obtained by Trevor's friends through their dogged, persistent efforts. While they were grateful to have found the footage, by the time they received it, they discovered that 4 entire days had been lost. On Tuesday, December 12th, members of the Garda Sub-Aqua Unit, now known as the Garda Water Unit, searched the Grand Canal, located between the Bagot Street Bridge and Leeson Street Bridge, as well as the River Dodder, 2 of the 3 rivers which ran through Dublin. Sadly, though, they did not find anything. Not only was Trevor nowhere to be found in these bodies of water, but there was no trace of him found within. In fact, the items that he had with him at the time of his disappearance, his coat, wallet, phone, and umbrella, have never been recovered. Tosh Lavery, a senior Gardaí who worked for 30 years in the Sub-Aqua Unit, was one of the people who dove into the Grand Canal during this search for Trevor Deely. He later remembered, "The canal is an easy place to search. It's like a swimming pool." This statement, along with many others made by various members of Trevor's family and the Garda, has led many to think that Trevor never went into the water. And while it's impossible to tell what happened in the days between Trevor disappearing and these numerous searches, the lack of any evidence indicating he went into the water seems to indicate just that, right? Regarding this, Trevor's brother, Mark Deely, stated, "I'm absolutely certain today that Trevor, or anything belonging to Trevor, is not in the Grand Canal. What I cannot be certain of is that he is not in the Grand Canal Basin, or something belonging to him is not in the Grand Canal Basin." For a time, authorities briefly considered draining the Grand Canal Basin in their search for Trevor, but discovered that doing so would affect the structure of the surrounding buildings. Searches of the basin would be facilitated, but were also unable to find any trace of the missing 22-year-old. It was later learned that the weekend that Trevor had gone missing, his sister Michelle attempted to call him several times, probably 4 times, per her recollection, but did not know that he was missing at the time, so just assumed that he had been held up by friends or other family members. She believes that she heard his phone ring during these calls, which, according to senior research fellow Dr. Philip Perry, who worked for the Radio and Optical Communications Lab at Dublin City University, wouldn't have happened if Trevor had gone into the water. While explaining how a phone in 2000 would have gone dead within seconds of falling into the water, Dr. Perry recalled to the Irish Times in 2015, "The radio signals would not penetrate more than a few inches of water, so it couldn't ring. If a phone has been in the water since 2000, there may still be a slim chance of getting the SIM out of it and getting phone numbers off it, but that's really all you could get from it now." Although technology in 2000 was not nearly as advanced as it is today, it was still the mobile phone era. Sadly though, while Trevor's cell phone could have provided a lot of clues to help solve his disappearance, authorities were not able to locate any trace of it, nor could his network provider. Hoping to discover if there was a link between Trevor's disappearance and his trip to Alaska just weeks prior, 2 members of the Garda traveled to Alaska to interview the girl that Trevor had visited. Trevor's sisters Michelle and Pamela would make a similar trip on their own, separately traveling to Anchorage to speak to the girl to discover if she potentially knew anything. Sadly though, neither of these trips seemed to rouse any leads. Trevor's brother Mark remained in Dublin for 2 months, but eventually had to return home, telling reporters, "I came back because I couldn't do any more. I just ran out of ideas. I made the decision to come home because I said, if I keep going the way I'm going to drive myself absolutely mad, and it's time for life to move on." Michael Deely, Trevor's father, did not resume his job for more than 6 months following Trevor's disappearance. His office on Lower Mount Street, overlooking the canal where his son had last been seen, became a daily reminder of his tragic loss. He later said, "It couldn't have been worse from that point of view. You were reminded every day and every hour when you went out." In 2016, the Garda investigation into Trevor Deely's mysterious disappearance was reopened. They announced a €100,000 reward for anyone that provided significant information regarding the case. At that time, footage and images from the 2 CCTV cameras that captured footage of Trevor were sent to Britain, where they were to be enhanced digitally with new software. This enhanced footage finally emerged publicly in April of 2017, with Gardaí announcing that the man dressed in black, seen walking behind Trevor at 4:14 a.m., was the same man that he had spoken to outside of his office. To this day, this man remains unidentified, as does his rationale for waiting outside of Trevor's office and later walking behind him. While one might think that this is merely a coincidence, authorities do not believe so, and this unknown subject is believed to be the primary person of interest in Trevor's still unsolved